Shadow in the Mirror. Part 1. An Invitation into Silence. The rain had begun to fall before twilight, a slow, deliberate drizzle that turned the sky into a sheet of gray silk. At the edge of the city, where the woods whispered in old dialects of wind, the Malinov Manor rose from the hillside like the memory of a forgotten century. Built in 1892, it had endured time and tragedy alike. Tonight, its doors opened once more for something neither the living nor the dead could quite name. Alyssa Malinovska adjusted her scarf as her taxi curved along the long, pebble drive. The manor revealed itself in increments. First the towers, then the ivy-covered stone, and finally the tall, arched doorway that seemed to frown at newcomers. It wasn't her first time seeing it. Photographs and family whispers had etched its outline in her mind, but nothing prepared her for the way it loomed in reality. She hadn't planned to come. The letter had arrived 2 weeks earlier, written in careful calligraphy and sealed with deep red wax. Inside was an invitation to the 70th birthday of Dmytro Malinov, a distant relative she had never met. A famous collector of rare artifacts, he was known for his charm and for his secrets, though which came first depended on who was telling the story. Alyssa, a historian by training but a detective by instinct, knew that kind of man all too well. She entered the foyer just as a grandfather clock struck 7. The warmth of the interior was unexpected. Polished wood, soft candlelight, the scent of cedar and old books. A butler in a dark suit took her coat without a word, and soon she was ushered into the great hall where 6 other guests mingled with the practiced politeness of strangers who knew they were being watched. There was Elena, a statuesque woman with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes. Marco, a talkative investor who laughed too hard at his own jokes. Father Bodon, a quiet priest with ink-stained fingers. Sophia, a composed nurse with a distant look. And a couple, Leonid and Katerina, dressed like they had stepped from a vintage film, elegant and unreadable. Dmytro appeared shortly before dinner. He was thinner than Alyssa expected, dressed in an embroidered vest and walking with a silver-tipped cane. But his eyes, sharp, amused, and faintly cruel, still held court over the room like a monarch surveying loyal subjects. He raised a glass, toasted to time and truth, and smiled at Alyssa for just a second longer than was comfortable. The evening passed in a blur of wine, stories, and wary glances. The manor's vast halls seemed to hum with anticipation. Every guest appeared cordial, yet none quite at ease. There were too many locked doors, too many paintings with missing nameplates, too many glances exchanged when they thought no one was watching. After dinner, Dmytro invited no one upstairs. He vanished quietly, saying he needed rest and would return in the morning with something special to show, something none of them would forget. He was right. By dawn, he was dead. Part 2. The Room Behind the Lock. The cry came just before sunrise, a breathless, strangled sound from deep within the house. It was Sophia, the nurse, who had discovered the body. Her knock on Dmytro's bedroom door had gone unanswered. When no one responded to her calls, she fetched Leonid and Marco to help. Together, they forced open the door to his private study, the one he had entered the night before and locked from the inside. The room was a time capsule. Dark mahogany walls lined with relics and books, a Persian rug slightly frayed at the edges, and in the center, Dmytro's armchair, still upright and facing the fireplace. He sat slumped to one side, his head bowed unnaturally. The light from the gray morning did not soften the stiffness in his limbs or the stillness in his chest. The air smelled of burnt wax and stale perfume. There were no signs of forced entry. No shattered window. No weapon in sight. Only one strange detail stood out. The large mirror over the fireplace had been shattered, its fragments lying like silver leaves across the hearth. And on the desk beneath it, a single sheet of parchment, folded once, sealed with a wax insignia no one recognized. Alyssa was the first to break the silence. She reached for the letter and read it aloud. "Forgive me for what I must reveal. Ivan Teet, and no one recognized the name." At first, the guests reacted with disbelief. Marco insisted the old man must have died of natural causes. He had heart problems, didn't he? Elena murmured that it must have been suicide, given the cryptic note. But Alyssa's instincts rebelled against both suggestions. The expression on Dimitro's face wasn't peaceful. It was startled. She noticed the positioning of the chair, turned just slightly toward the mirror, as though he'd seen something before the end. She crouched near the fragments, careful not to touch them, and saw that the shattering had originated from the inside. The force had come from within the room. No one had been able to enter. The door was locked, the windows secured. The only key to the study, according to Sophia, had been with Dimitro at all times on a chain around his neck. But that chain was missing. So was the key. And the note. Why would Dimitro write something and sign it as someone else? Unless he hadn't written it. Part 3. Whispers beneath the glass. The manor felt colder after Dimitro's death, though no window had been opened and the fireplaces still burned. It wasn't the weather, it was the atmosphere. Fear had entered the halls and was settling into the walls like damp. Alyssa stood at the end of the corridor, staring down its dark length. Somewhere down, there was the truth. Somewhere down, there was the person who had turned a gathering into a prison. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the evening in reverse. Dimitro's strange toast, the way his eyes had lingered on her, the locked study, and now the note signed Ivan T. None of it made sense. And yet she couldn't shake the feeling that all of it was planned, not by accident, but with intention. Like Dimitro had staged a scene, and someone else had seized control of the script. After a tense breakfast, during which no one touched their food and everyone avoided eye contact, Alyssa returned to the study. She slipped in while the others argued over what to do next. The room hadn't changed. Neither had Dimitro's still form, though Sophia had gently covered him with a cloth and insisted he remain untouched until a decision was made. Alyssa crouched beside the desk and opened the drawers. Most held predictable things: pens, papers, a few faded photographs. But in the third drawer, she found something else. A small, black leather-bound notebook with yellowing pages. Dimitro's journal. She opened it to the first page, half expecting it to be filled with antique inventories or philosophical musings. Instead, it was a collection of names, dates, symbols, codes, and scribbled in one margin, circled twice, the word Kladovka, Ukrainian for storeroom. The manor had several. She remembered passing one in the West Wing. Old and mostly unused. Dust on the handle, rust on the lock. She went there alone, notebook in hand. The others were too wrapped in suspicion and paranoia to notice her absence. The door groaned when she opened it. Inside, the storeroom was narrow, cluttered with crates, old trunks, and shelves of unlabeled jars. But what caught her attention was a patch of floorboard, slightly darker than the rest, as if it had been touched more often. She knelt and pressed down. A click. The panel shifted, revealing a cavity beneath. Hidden within it was a small tin box. Inside, a bundle of old letters, yellow with time, and a single photograph. A younger Dimitro stood beside another man, taller, with a square jaw and intelligent eyes. The back of the photo read, Ivanko and I.1973, Lviv. Ivanko, Ivan T. Dimitro's business partner? Friend? Rival? She turned to the letters. They were from Ivan, addressed to Dimitro, written over a decade. The early ones were warm, collaborative, filled with shared ambition and trust. But the tone darkened. Accusations appeared. Mentions of betrayal, of a stolen artifact, of ruin, and then silence. The last letter was never opened. It bore a date 2 weeks before Ivan's supposed disappearance. It reads simply, If you ever look in the mirror and see me, know this, I've already forgiven you. But I won't forget. Alyssa stared at the paper for a long time. Someone had dug up this past. Someone had used it to manipulate Dimitro, to scare him, maybe to drive him to recreate a final encounter that never happened. But Ivan had been gone for decades, hadn't he? When Alyssa returned, she found Elena waiting in the hallway outside her room. Her arms were folded, her jaw tense. I saw you sneaking around, she said. Find anything useful? That depends. Do you know anyone named Ivan Tkachenko? Elena blinked once slowly. I knew of him. Everyone in the art world did. He was brilliant and reckless. Disappeared after being accused of selling forged artifacts. Dimitro testified against him. So he was real? Oh yes, but he's been dead a long time. Alyssa met her gaze. You sure? Elena didn't answer. Instead, she handed Alyssa a folded piece of paper. I found this under my pillow this morning, she said. Alyssa opened it. It was a message written in the same elegant script as the one from the study. You're not the only one who lied. The mirror keeps all secrets, but it breaks for truth. A chill ran down Alyssa's spine. Someone in the house knew everything. And the mirror, the one shattered on the night Dimitro died, had seen them all. Part 4. The man no one saw. By midday, the storm that had hung over the manor since the night of the party broke open into a steady downpour. Rain pelted the tall windows like 1,000 insistent fingers trying to get in. Alyssa stared out through the glass, her thoughts racing faster than the water streaming down the pane. She had taken a photograph of Ivan and the letters and hidden them in her room, tucked behind the false panel of the fireplace. Something about them felt volatile, like they could burn a hole through the fragile peace still holding the household together. But that peace was cracking by the hour. Suspicion bloomed like mold. Leonid and Katerina no longer spoke unless prompted, their earlier elegance replaced by silence and cold stares. Marco had grown more erratic, pacing, muttering to himself, and checking his phone for a signal that never came. Sophia stayed near the study, as though guarding Dimitro's body or perhaps hiding from her own guilt. Elena watched everything, quiet, calculating, always with a glass of brandy near her hand. Alyssa, meanwhile, had questions, and she needed answers. She cornered Father Bodon in the library. He sat among the books like a misplaced monk, a worn Bible open on his lap, but unread. Do you remember a man named Ivan Tkachenko? She asked directly. The priest looked up, his eyes unreadable. I do. Tell me. He closed the Bible gently. He was complicated. He and Dimitro once worked together, not just in antiques, but in acquisition. Questionable acquisition. You might call it theft, but they justified it by claiming they were preserving history. Alyssa leaned forward. And what happened? They both fell in love with the same woman. That was the beginning of the end. There was a fight, not just over her, but over a mirror, an artifact they had found in Bukovina, old, hand-forged, Eastern Orthodox. They said it reflected not just the person, but the soul. A curse, Ivan claimed. A gift, Dimitro insisted. And the woman? Gone, Bodon said simply. Vanished like the mirror. Some say Ivan took it. Some say she did. Dimitro never spoke of her again. Alyssa felt something tighten in her chest. She didn't know why, but a strange familiarity echoed through that story, like hearing a lullaby you'd forgotten you knew. As she left the library, something caught her eye. A small envelope slipped under her door. Again, she opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph, grainy, black and white, taken from behind a window. It showed the guests standing in the foyer the night before Dimitro's death. All 7 of them. Except, in this photo, there were 8 figures. One man, dressed in black, his face obscured, stood just inside the shadows of the staircase. He hadn't appeared in the group photos Dimitro had taken. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't been accounted for. Alyssa stared at the face she could not see. Every hair on her arm stood on end. The man had been there, watching, unseen. She rushed downstairs to confront the others. This had gone beyond coincidence, beyond games. When she entered the parlor, the room went silent. Her expression said more than words could, and when she laid the photo on the table, it was Katerina who spoke first, in a whisper, as though afraid the walls might hear. I saw him, she said, only for a second, at the end of the hall. I thought he was a servant. Marco turned pale. That can't be. Dimitro said no staff would be on duty after midnight. Father Bodon crossed himself. Elena, unusually pale, said nothing. But it was Sophia who moved toward Alyssa, eyes wide. "I think he came into my room," she said, her voice trembling. "I woke up. I thought I was dreaming. But I heard breathing. Heavy. Right by the mirror." No one dared speak for a full minute. Then Alyssa said what they were all thinking. "He's still here." Part 5. The Portrait with No Name. The manor no longer felt like a place of shelter. With every passing hour, its grand rooms and gilded frames pressed tighter around them. Walls that once echoed with polite conversation now swallowed every whisper. That night, no one slept. Doors were bolted. Lights were left on. Even Marco, who had earlier laughed at the idea of a hidden guest, now carried a poker from the fireplace like a weapon. The mysterious photograph had shattered the illusion that they were alone, and more importantly, that the danger had passed with Dimitro. Alyssa stayed up, poring over Dimitro's journal, trying to trace the path of his thoughts in the weeks before his death. Between pages of cryptic inventory notes and obscure historical trivia, she found another clue, a half-finished sketch tucked into the back cover. A rough pencil drawing of a man's face. Sharp cheekbones, intense eyes, no name, but the caption below it chilled her. He never left the mirror. It wasn't just paranoia now. It was legacy. She carried the sketch down to the gallery room, the long corridor where Dimitro had kept his most treasured paintings. The portraits hung in silence, faces trapped behind layers of oil and varnish. Most were labeled patrons, ancestors, collectors, past guests. But one portrait had no plaque. It was slightly older, darker, and poorly lit, and the face in the painting matched the sketch exactly. She stared at it, transfixed. The longer she looked, the more certain she became. This man had been important, but his name had been removed, scratched from history. She reached to tilt the frame and noticed something even more disturbing. Behind it, etched into the wall in a faded, rust-colored pigment, were the words, "Find the mirror, and you find the truth." She backed away. The frame creaked slightly, as if resisting her touch, or welcoming it. Voices behind her broke the silence. The others had followed. Leonid read the words aloud and muttered, "This is madness." But Alyssa's voice was steady. "No, this is a trail." Katerina stared at the portrait. "You think this is Ivan?" "I think Dimitro wanted someone to find this after he was gone." "And what mirror?" asked Sophia. Alyssa turned toward them. "The one he fought over. The one he and Ivan stole. The one that vanished." "The cursed one?" Elena asked dryly. "The mirror that sees truth," Alyssa said. And in the silence that followed, a low sound echoed through the corridor. A creak, soft but drawn out. They turned toward the end of the hallway, just in time to see the door to the basement slowly close. Someone was down there. Without a word, Alyssa moved forward, the others trailing her reluctantly. The basement had always been off-limits, even during her childhood visits. Dimitro used to say it was too dangerous, filled with unstable beams and rotting floorboards. But now she suspected he had simply been hiding something. The door groaned as she opened it again. The stairwell beyond descended into blackness. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of mildew and dust. She lit one of the oil lamps from the hallway and stepped down. Each creak of the steps beneath her feet seemed louder than the last. At the bottom, crates, shelves, covered furniture, all cloaked in thick cobwebs. And in the far corner, hidden behind a stack of broken chairs, was a large object covered in a heavy velvet cloth. Alyssa approached. She reached out, heart hammering, and pulled it down. There, in the dim light of the flickering lamp, stood a mirror. Tall, Gothic, framed in twisted iron. Its surface was untouched by dust, smooth and dark like still water. But what made her breath catch in her throat wasn't the mirror itself. It was the reflection. Everyone was visible. Herself, Katerina, Leonid, Elena, Sophia, Marco, Bodon, clustered behind her in varying states of confusion and fear. But in the center of the reflection, standing just behind Alyssa's shoulder, was a man no one could see in the room. The man from the portrait. The man with no name. Part 6. Fractures. A scream shattered the silence. Katerina's. As Alyssa stumbled back from the mirror, knocking over the lamp. The flames sputtered out on the stone floor, plunging the basement into darkness. Someone fumbled with a flashlight. A beam of weak, shaky light illuminated the mirror once more. The man was gone from the reflection. Everyone stood frozen. No one breathed. No one moved. Then Leonid snarled, "What kind of trick is this? A hidden projection? A prank?" "No trick," Alyssa whispered. "We all saw him." But not everyone had. Marco, pale and sweating, insisted he'd only seen their own reflections. "This is hysteria," he snapped. "We're making ghosts out of shadows." Yet deep in his voice was doubt. Sophia knelt to pick up the fallen lamp. "Dimitro kept this thing hidden." "Why?" "For the same reason he left us clues," Alyssa said. "He knew someone would come looking." They returned upstairs, shaken and silent. No one wanted to be the first to speak. But the air was different now, not just tense, but charged. Something had shifted. In her room, Alyssa pored over the journal again. She found a half-burned page tucked between the covers, torn and crumpled. It was part of a letter. The signature was missing, but the content was clear. "The mirror feeds on secrets. It does not show what is, but what is hidden. You must not look too long, or you'll forget who you really are." That night, the house came alive. Doors creaked open on their own. Lights flickered. Distant footsteps echoed through empty halls. And just before dawn, Elena burst into the main parlor, breathless and wide-eyed. "Someone entered my room," she said. "I woke up to find this on my pillow." She held up another note, scrawled in the same unmistakable hand. "I know what you did in Prague, and so does the mirror." Elena's face was tight, cold fury in her jaw. "This is blackmail." Leonid stepped forward. "You think someone among us is planting these?" "I think Dimitro wanted us to turn on each other," she hissed. "To break us down. Maybe he was dying already and wanted to go out with a twisted performance." Alyssa shook her head. "I think he was trying to expose someone, and he didn't know how far that person would go to keep their past buried." Sophia, her voice barely above a whisper, said, "What if it's not one of us?" Everyone fell quiet, but Alyssa's thoughts were spinning. She had grown up believing her connection to Dimitro was thin, just a distant family thread. But the more she uncovered, the clearer it became that he'd kept her close for a reason. And the mirror, that cursed artifact, had been calling to her since she first arrived. Not just as a detective, but as something more. That evening, Alyssa returned to the basement alone. She stared into the mirror again. This time, she asked a question aloud. "What are you hiding from me?" The surface shimmered. For a second, she saw not the reflection of the room, but a memory. Dimitro and a woman, beautiful, intense, with her hair in a dark braid, standing in front of the mirror. The woman held a child. Alyssa's heart stopped. The woman looked just like her. And in that moment, she knew the truth. The woman wasn't just someone Dimitro had known. She was Alyssa's mother. Part 7. Blood Beneath Glass. The vision dissolved as quickly as it had formed, swallowed by the mirror's dark glass. Alyssa stumbled backward, breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. Her mother had died when she was a baby, or so she'd been told. She sank to the floor, heart pounding. The woman in the mirror had looked just like her, the same jawline, the same storm gray eyes. She'd held a child in her arms, and Dimitro had been there, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. The child, it must have been Alyssa. Why had no one ever told her? Why had Dimitro hidden this? Footsteps echoed above, followed by the murmur of voices. Someone was arguing in the upstairs hallway. Alyssa stood, pushing the weight of the revelation aside. There was no time to fall apart. The past could wait for now. She returned to the main floor to find chaos blooming in the sitting room. Elena was standing over Katerina, who clutched her cheek, red and blotchy. "She hit me," Katerina spat. "She thinks I planted that note under her pillow." Elena's hands were trembling, her voice hard. "Because you have always been jealous. Of Dimitro, of me, of everything you couldn't have." "Jealousy doesn't make me a liar," Katerina snapped back. "Enough," Leonid barked, stepping between them. "We're unraveling. This is exactly what the mirror wants, whoever controls it." "It's not the mirror," Marco muttered. It's her. He pointed directly at Alyssa. None of this started until she came. Alyssa met his gaze, calm but cold. Maybe because I'm not willing to pretend nothing's wrong. Sophia, quiet until now, stepped forward. No, she's right. Something is wrong. But it started long before Alyssa arrived. She opened her palm, and it was a rusted key. I found this in Dimitro's study, inside a false drawer. What does it open? Asked Father Bodon. Sophia hesitated. I think the crypt. Everyone froze. The family crypt, a sealed room beneath the manor, untouched since Dimitro's wife's burial 2 decades ago. The idea of entering it filled them all with dread. But Alyssa knew they had no choice. The mirror had revealed her mother, alive, in the manor, in Dimitro's company. If answers existed, they would be down there. They descended once more through a side stairwell behind a bookshelf in the library. Sophia unlocked the gate with a loud metallic clunk. The air was cold and dry. Dust hung in thick clouds. Candles lit the way to stone coffins lined against the wall, each engraved with the names of Dimitro's ancestors. But one was different, set apart, smaller, older. Its nameplate had been removed. Alyssa brushed off the grime and dirt. Beneath the dust, someone had etched a name by hand. Larissa M., her mother's name. Tears stung her eyes. She was here. Sophia crouched beside her. Alyssa, that woman in the mirror. I've seen her before. Alyssa turned sharply. Where? In one of Dimitro's photo albums. I thought she was a model or an actress. I was a child, but I remember her eyes. Just like yours. Alyssa swallowed hard. What happened to her? No one ever said. One day she was here, and then she wasn't. At the far end of the crypt, Marco shouted, Over here! They rushed over. Behind an overturned stone was a door, half-rotted and ancient, leading deeper underground. Carved into its surface was the same phrase Alyssa had seen behind the painting. Find a mirror, and you find the truth. Without waiting for agreement, she pushed it open. The passage beyond was narrow, lined with broken picture frames and discarded boxes. At the end stood a door of polished blackwood. On it, a single mirror was mounted, oval, ornate, and familiar. But this one reflected nothing. It was black, empty, dead, and yet something pulsed beneath its surface. Alyssa stepped closer. So did the others. And then the door behind them slammed shut. Part 8. The Chamber of Echoes. The sound of the door slamming echoed like a shot. Alyssa spun around and lunged at it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. Or sealed. Sophia banged against it. It won't open. Who closed it? Marco hissed. Was it one of us? No, Alyssa said, stepping back from the mirror. It was the house. The others fell silent. The chamber around them was strange. Stone walls, but smooth, unnaturally so. Carved into the floor was a large, circular symbol, a sun split down the middle, one half black, one half white. Above it, the blank mirror loomed like an eye waiting to open. Leonid approached the mirror cautiously. It doesn't reflect anything. It's not a mirror, Katerina whispered. It's a gate. They all turned toward her. I read about it, she continued, in Dimitro's papers. He believed this mirror came from a monastery in the Carpathians. The monks called it Oko Temrievi, the Eye of Darkness. It was said to reveal not the world, but the soul. Alyssa's heart thudded. That's why he kept it hidden. Because it doesn't show what's outside, Katerina said. It shows what you want to forget. Suddenly, the surface of the mirror shimmered and lit up like black lightning had danced across it. One by one, they were pulled forward. Not physically, but mentally, psychically, as if the mirror had reached inside their minds and was now pulling memories from the deepest wells. Images began to form. For Leonid, it was a courtroom, his hands red, his lawyer's voice calm as he spun lies to free a guilty man. For Elena, a child screaming as she slammed the door and drove away forever. For Sophia, a man sobbing on a hospital bed, her name on his lips, a father she'd abandoned in pursuit of her career. They turned away, gasping, pale, ashamed. Then came Alyssa's vision. But hers wasn't a memory. It was a voice. Low, gentle, familiar. You were never supposed to know. She turned, but there was no one beside her. The mirror showed a room, Dimitro's study, years ago. A younger version of him stood near the fireplace, speaking to someone hidden in shadow. If she learns the truth, it will destroy her. Let the past stay buried. The mirror is too dangerous. The other voice answered, a woman's voice. You don't get to decide that anymore. Then the mirror cracked. A single fracture. Thin, like a hairline break in the surface. The room trembled. Enough, said Father Bodon, stepping forward. This is blasphemy. This mirror is not a tool. It's a trap. Dimitro brought it here and sealed it away for a reason. But he kept coming back to it, Alyssa said. And he left all these clues, not just to torment us. To lead us. To what? Bodon asked. To the truth, she said. About him. About us. About me. Sophia reached out, gently, and touched the mirror's frame. Maybe it's not about seeing secrets, she said. Maybe it's about facing them. Another crack split across the mirror. The room pulsed. And suddenly, the door behind them opened with a long, echoing groan. They turned as one. The hallway beyond was lit now by a pale blue light. They fled the chamber, stumbling into the corridor, gasping for air as though they'd been holding their breath for hours. At the end of the corridor was another staircase, one they hadn't seen before. It led upward into a part of the house Alyssa didn't recognize. When they emerged, they were in a narrow attic, untouched by time, thick with dust, filled with old trunks and forgotten paintings. And sitting in the center of the room was a single, leather-bound book. Alyssa picked it up and opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs, black and white, sepia-toned, then color. The same woman appeared again and again. Her mother. And always, beside her, Dimitro. And in one photo, behind them, on the wall, was the mirror. Not in the basement, but in a child's nursery. Her nursery. Alyssa closed the book. Whatever this is, she said softly, it didn't begin with Dimitro. She looked at the others. It began with me. Part 9. Inheritance of Shadows. The attic air was thick with dust and memory. The silence in the room pressed down on them as Alyssa held the photo album in trembling hands. The image of her mother, young, radiant, unmistakably her, stared out from the page. Dimitro stood beside her, not as a distant relative or guardian, but as something more, partner, protector, or perhaps accomplice. Why would he keep all this hidden? Sophia asked quietly. Alyssa barely heard her. Her eyes had settled on one image, an old black and white photo. A crib placed directly in front of the ornate mirror. Her mother was leaning over it, smiling down at a sleeping infant. She put me in front of the mirror, Alyssa whispered. She let it see me. Marco scoffed. What does that even mean? But Father Bodon paled. There are beliefs, he said slowly, his voice filled with the weight of old superstitions. That mirrors are not just objects, that they remember, that a child's reflection can be imprinted, bound to something beyond this world if the mirror is ancient. Alyssa snapped the book shut. You think I'm cursed? I think, Bodon said carefully, you are connected. Elena shook her head, tense with disbelief. This is madness. Old myths and ghost stories. But no one spoke to agree, because beneath the fear, there was something else, recognition. A shared dread. Katerina sat down hard on an old trunk, her voice brittle. Dimitro used to say the mirror was the only thing that ever told the truth. Even when he didn't want to hear it. Alyssa asked, especially then. She turned to Leonid. You spent more time with him in recent years than anyone. Did he ever mention my mother? Leonid hesitated. Only once. He was drunk. He said, she saw too much. That's why she left. I thought he meant she ran away. Alyssa nodded. She didn't. She disappeared. And Dimitro covered it up. Sophia looked around the room. There are more trunks. Letters. We should go through them all. They worked in silence, dusting off papers, reading notes, decoding scraps of correspondence. Piece by piece, the story emerged. Alyssa Malinovska, Alyssa's mother, had come to the manor as a historian, tasked with cataloging Dimitro's vast and secret collection of occult artifacts. She and Dimitro fell in love, and for a time, they were inseparable. But Larissa had found the mirror, and she'd gone too far. In one torn journal entry, written in her hand, I saw the child's future. The mirror showed me more than I asked. I begged it to stop, but the reflection kept smiling. And then, if I don't leave, it will consume her. Alyssa felt a chill settle into her bones. Her mother had left not to run, but to protect her. From the mirror, from what it had shown, I've been a puzzle piece in a game I never agreed to play, she whispered. No, said Sophia. You're the key. You were always meant to end this. The sun was beginning to rise outside the attic window. A thin beam of light cut across the room and landed on a painting propped against the far wall. Alyssa pulled away the dust cloth. It was a portrait. Her mother again, this time painted in oils. But her expression was unreadable, caught between fear and defiance. And behind her, in the painting, was a door, unlike any in the manor. Alyssa stared at it. I've seen this before. Marco frowned. Where? In a dream, she said. In the mirror. And it wasn't just a painting. It was a place. She stepped back. We haven't found the end of this mystery, she said. Only its beginning. Part 10. The Door Without a Key. The painting haunted Alyssa even after they left the attic. Its muted colors, the eerie calm on her mother's face, the strange door looming behind her. All of it felt like a memory trapped in oil and canvas. It wasn't just art. It was a warning. Or a map. They gathered again in the study, the morning light leaking pale and uncertain through the tall windows. Outside, the estate grounds were still covered in frost. Inside, the house remained silent, as if waiting. Alyssa placed the painting on the desk, while the others surrounded her. This door, she said, pointing to the one behind her mother in the painting, doesn't exist in the manor. At least not in the blueprints I saw in Dimitro's records. Then it was hidden, said Leonid. Or removed, Katerina added. Built over. Father Bodon leaned closer. It may be older than the house. I've seen symbols like that, carved into the arch, in medieval churches, places built over older shrines. Pagan. They stare at the painting's frame, where an almost invisible glyph glowed faintly in the light, a twisted knot with no beginning or end. Sophia's voice was quiet. So where do we start? Alyssa studied the angles in the painting, the lighting. There's a window, a tall one, arched with stained glass. If we find that room, we find a door, Marco finished grimly. Hours passed as they searched, breaking into walled-off wings, tugging aside bookcases, tapping hollow walls. Eventually, in the west wing, a part of the house untouched for decades, they found it. A long hallway, walled in dust and silence. At the end, the arched window with its shattered stained glass. And beside it, the door. It matched the painting exactly. Black wood, silver frame, a lock with no keyhole, no handle. Just that strange, knotted symbol carved into the center like a brand. Elena stepped forward. How do we open it? We don't, said Sophia. We wake it. They stared at her. Sophia held up Dimitro's journal, open to a page near the end. He wrote, The door listens. The mirror remembers. Only she can make it see again. Who's she? Marco asked. But they already knew. Alyssa stepped toward the door. She didn't speak. She simply placed her palm over the symbol. And the door breathed. The knot began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter, until its shape pulsed with silver light. The wood beneath her hand grew warm, then hot, and then cold. There was a click, and the door creaked open. Beyond it, blackness. Alyssa turned to the others. No more running. They stepped inside. The air was still. No dust. No decay. Just stone, smooth and ancient, carved with strange, swirling patterns that shimmered faintly under their flashlight beams. They descended a staircase that curved slowly downward. No words were spoken. Only the sounds of breath and the distant hum of something beneath the earth. Then they reached the bottom. A vast circular chamber, empty save for a single raised platform in the center. Upon it stood a mirror, the mirror, not the cracked one from the cellar, not the dark reflection they had fled. This one was whole, clean, and it was already showing them something. Alyssa stepped forward and saw her mother, younger, afraid, clutching a bundle in her arms. The baby, her, crying in the nursery. And then the reflection shifted. Now her mother was older, standing beside Dimitro, crying. If the child stays, the mirror will take her. Then we must make it believe she's gone. The image blurred, then cleared again. Dimitro, alone now, placing a sleeping baby in a basket, speaking to someone in the shadows. Erase her from the house, from memory, hide everything. And the mother? She'll disappear too. Alyssa turned to the others, voice barely a whisper. They faked it all. My mother didn't abandon me. Dimitro made it look like she did. To protect me. Or to protect himself. The mirror flickered again. And this time, it showed a figure. Watching them. Not in the past. In the now. From behind the mirror. A presence, faceless, cloaked in shifting shadow, almost human, but not. The mirror began to hum. And then it spoke. In a voice that sounded like Alyssa's but wasn't. I've been waiting for you. Part 11. The voice behind the glass. The chamber felt colder now. The flickering light from their torches cast long shadows on the walls, making the swirling patterns on the stone seem to move of their own accord. The mirror stood like an ominous sentinel in the center of the room, its surface rippling with the voice that had just spoken. Alyssa's breath caught in her chest. I've been waiting for you. The words were clear, but distorted, as if they were coming from deep within the glass itself. It wasn't her own voice. It was something else, something ancient. Alyssa stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Who are you? She demanded, her voice steady but trembling with the weight of the unknown. The reflection in the mirror shifted again. At first, it was just her, standing there, but then the edges of the image blurred, and something else began to emerge. A figure, tall, indistinct, with eyes that seemed to shift like liquid shadows. You know who I am, the voice replied, now softer, more insistent. I am the one who remembers, the one who never forgets. Forget what? Alyssa asked, her throat dry. The figure in the mirror seemed to smile, though its face was still shrouded in darkness. Your past, your lineage, the truth of your blood. Alyssa's mind raced. She had heard those words before, in the journals, in Dimitro's cryptic warnings, in her mother's last note. You're not my mother, she said, her voice a whisper of realization. You're not Dimitro. The figure tilted its head, as if amused by her confusion. No, I'm neither of them. But they were mine. And you, Alyssa, are mine as well. The mirror began to swirl again, the surface shifting like water. Images flooded her mind. Memories that weren't hers, images of a past life, a life that seemed to belong to someone else. She saw her mother, young and frightened, running from the mirror. She saw Dimitro, desperate, trying to protect her. She saw the first time the mirror had come to the house, and the dark power that it had brought with it. You were always meant to be here, the voice continued, to fulfill the role they denied you, to unlock what was sealed away. What are you talking about? Alyssa demanded, her voice rising in panic. What do you want from me? The figure smiled again, its shadowy face twisting into something both familiar and terrifying. I want nothing from you, Alyssa. I've already taken everything I need. Suddenly, the mirror began to ripple violently, as though it was alive, the surface shimmering like a storm on the water. The figure in the glass stretched forward, its form warping as it reached toward her. No, Alyssa shouted, stepping back, her heart pounding in her chest. But it was too late. The mirror's surface seemed to reach out, as though it had grown hands of liquid shadow. It gripped Alyssa's wrists, pulling her toward it with an unnatural force. Alyssa! Sophia screamed, rushing forward, but she was held back by an invisible barrier. The mirror's voice came again, now a guttural rasp. You can never escape me. You were born from me, and now you will return. Alyssa struggled against the grip, but the mirror was stronger. She could feel herself being pulled into the glass, her body vibrating with the force of the pull. She could hear the others shouting, but their voices seemed to fade, drowned out by the hum of the mirror. In a panic, she reached for the pendant around her neck, the one her mother had given her, the one she had never taken off. The pendant glowed faintly in her hand, and for the first time, she felt a connection to it. The mirror's grip faltered for a moment. Alyssa's eyes widened with realization. No, she whispered, almost to herself. This is what it wanted. To consume me. But then, a flash of understanding. The mirror was feeding off her fear, her doubt, her confusion. It had drawn her in, made her believe that it held the truth, that it was the keeper of her past. But it was nothing more than a parasite, feeding on the darkness of her soul. With renewed strength, Alyssa wrenched her arm free. She clutched the pendant tightly, closing her eyes, willing herself to remember, to embrace the truth that had been hidden from her for so long. I won't let you control me, she said firmly, her voice trembling but resolute. I am not yours. For a moment, the mirror hesitated. Then, with a roar of fury, it shattered, the surface fracturing into 1,000 pieces, the glass falling away like rain. Alyssa fell backward, gasping for air, as the mirror's power vanished. The others rushed to her side. You did it, Sophia said, her voice filled with awe. Alyssa didn't answer immediately. She was too shaken, too drained by the ordeal. But she could feel something shifting inside her. The mirror, the dark presence that had haunted her life, was finally gone. But the journey was far from over. We need to find out what really happened, Alyssa said, standing slowly. There are more pieces to this puzzle. She turned toward the others, her resolve hardening. We need to go deeper. We need to find out what Dimitro was hiding, what he was running from. And with that, they moved forward, not just to uncover the truth, but to face whatever awaited them in the depths of the manor. Part 12, The Heart of the House. The shattered remnants of the mirror lay scattered around the chamber like forgotten fragments of a dream. The silence that followed felt like a breath held too long, and the echoes of the mirror's voice seemed to linger in the air, mocking Alyssa's newfound strength. But she refused to let fear take hold again. The truth was within her reach, and nothing, not the mirror, not the shadows it had cast, would stand in her way. We need to find the hidden archives, Alyssa said, her voice steady. The ones Dimitro kept secret. Where do we even start? Marco asked, his face still pale from the encounter with the mirror. He wiped a hand across his forehead, as though trying to clear away the lingering tension. Alyssa turned to the others. We know there's more to this house than we've seen. There's a part of it that's been hidden for years, something Dimitro didn't want anyone to find. If we can find that, we'll uncover the rest of the story. Elena stepped forward. There's a room, a sealed chamber beneath the house, one that no one ever spoke of. I remember my father mentioning it, but he wouldn't say why it was locked away. Father Bodon nodded slowly. There are rumors of such places in old estates, rooms that hold things too dangerous to be left open. Alyssa's eyes narrowed. This isn't just about secrets. It's about power. Dimitro didn't just collect artifacts. He hid something dark. Sophia crossed her arms. And you think it's in this hidden room? Yes, Alyssa said, her voice firm. Whatever Dimitro was hiding, it's there. The answers are there. The group moved quickly through the manor, gathering supplies and preparing to search. But the closer they got to the heart of the house, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew heavier, colder. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the light from their torches flickered as if in fear. They found the entrance to the hidden chamber in the cellar, behind an old wooden bookshelf. The door was locked, but it wasn't just any lock. This one was old, centuries old, covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent energy. This is it, Alyssa whispered. This is where everything ends. She placed her hand on the lock, feeling the cold metal beneath her fingers. She closed her eyes, searching her mind for the connection, the key to unlocking it. Her mother had left her clues, small, hidden things. The pendant, the painting, the fragments of memory. Her hand trembled as she traced the pattern etched into the door. And then, just as she thought it was impossible, she felt the lock give way. With a low creak, the door swung open, revealing a darkened passageway beyond. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of earth and rot filled her nostrils. But there was something else, too, something that didn't belong. A faint, metallic scent like blood. They moved forward, their steps muffled in the thick darkness. The passage twisted and turned, leading them deep beneath the house. Finally, they reached a stone chamber. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carvings that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly energy. And in the center of the room, on an altar, lay a book. Alyssa's breath caught in her throat. It was the book her mother had been looking for. The one Dimitro had been so desperate to keep hidden. The one that contained the true history of the mirror and everything it represented. With trembling hands, Alyssa reached for the book. As soon as her fingers touched it, a shock ran through her body, as though the book itself were alive. The room seemed to shift around her, the walls stretching and bending, the air growing thick and suffocating. "No," she gasped, pulling her hand back. "This is what he was afraid of. This is what he tried to keep from me." "What's happening?" Katerina cried, her voice filled with fear. "The book is reacting to her," Father Bodon said, his voice low and strained. "It's drawing from her energy, from her blood." Alyssa felt dizzy, her vision swimming. The book seemed to pulse, calling to her, as though it were demanding something. "I have to open it," she whispered. "I have to know." But as her fingers touched the pages, the room seemed to collapse inward, the air thickening with darkness. A scream echoed through the chamber, but it wasn't from any of them. It was from the mirror. It shattered. The walls of the chamber began to twist and warp, the stone itself groaning under the strain. The book in Alyssa's hands began to glow, the pages turning on their own as the room descended into chaos. And then, through the swirling darkness, the voice returned. "I have been waiting for you, Alyssa," it said, its tone dark and triumphant. "I'm the one who binds you. And you, my dear, will never leave." The room began to collapse inward, and the ground beneath them began to crack. Alyssa screamed, clutching the book as the darkness closed in around them. But as the walls crumbled, one last thing became clear. Alyssa wasn't just the key to unlocking the mirror's power. She was the one who had been destined to destroy it all along. Part 13. The Final Revelation. The chamber was collapsing around them. The stone walls groaned and cracked, and the air grew thick with the scent of ancient decay. Alyssa could hear the others shouting, but their voices were muffled by the rumbling, the twisting of reality itself. The book in her hands glowed brighter, its pages turning faster, as though it were alive and desperate to reveal its secrets. "Alyssa, drop it!" Marco yelled, reaching toward her, but the ground beneath them trembled violently, and the path to him was swallowed by the crumbling walls. She couldn't hear him. She couldn't hear anything except the voice that had haunted her for so long, now louder, more present than ever. "I've been waiting," the voice said, its tone deep and resonant, filling every corner of the collapsing chamber. "You are the final piece, Alyssa, the one who will complete the cycle." "No," Alyssa whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. She tried to pull away from the book, but it was as though the pages were glued to her hands, pulling her deeper into the darkness. The light from the book pulsed, filling the room with a blinding glow, and for a moment, Alyssa felt like she was falling. Not physically, but spiritually, as though the very fabric of her soul was being torn apart. In the light, the mirror reappeared. It wasn't just a reflection now. It was a doorway, a portal to something beyond. The figure within it, the shadowy presence that had tormented her, loomed larger and more real than ever. And then, the truth broke free. The mirror wasn't just an object. It was a living entity, a being that had existed for centuries, feeding off the fear, the guilt, and the desires of those who came into contact with it. It had shaped the lives of everyone who had lived in the manor, manipulating them, twisting their fates. But Alyssa was different. She wasn't just another victim. She was the key, the bloodline she shared with her mother, The ancient power hidden within her family had always been tied to the mirror. It was no coincidence that she had been drawn here. No coincidence that her mother had disappeared. No coincidence that Dimitro had tried so desperately to hide the truth. Alyssa's heart raced as the mirror's power seemed to reach out, wrapping around her, pulling her toward it. "Stop!" she cried out, struggling against the pull. "I won't let you control me." The voice in the mirror chuckled, dark and twisted. "You never had a choice, Alyssa. You were born to be part of this, to bring balance." "Balance?" Alyssa's voice trembled with fury. "You call this balance? You've torn everything apart." The walls of the chamber buckled. The book in her hands felt like it was burning, the words searing into her skin. "You were never meant to understand." The voice continued, its tone calm now. "Your mother tried to escape. Dimitro tried to erase it all. But you can't run for what you are." The truth hit her like a physical blow. Alyssa wasn't just the key to destroying the mirror. She was the one who had created it. The dark power she had inherited, the bloodline that had been passed down through generations, was the very force that had brought the mirror into existence. She had been born from it, a part of it, the final piece needed to complete the cycle. "No," Alyssa whispered, shaking her head. She refused to accept it. She refused to believe that everything had been set in motion from the moment she was born. But the mirror showed her. Images flooded her mind. Her mother, her ancestors, all of them bound to the mirror in a twisted pact. A pact to protect the mirror's power, to keep it alive, to feed it with their blood. And now, it was Alyssa's turn to fulfill her destiny. "You have a choice, Alyssa," the voice said softly. "Join me. Let the mirror feed on you, and together, we will reign over everything." Alyssa stood at the precipice, torn between the past and the future. The weight of the mirror's influence pressed down on her, the darkness of her own bloodline threatening to consume her. The book was still burning in her hands, the words like poison in her veins. She could feel the power, the temptation to give in, to become one with the darkness, to wield the mirror's power as her own. But then, a flicker of light. She thought of her mother, of the sacrifices her mother had made to protect her. She thought of the friends who had stood by her, who had risked everything to help her uncover the truth. She thought of the future, the world outside the manor, a world that would be lost if the mirror's power was allowed to take hold. She clenched her fists around the book, feeling the fire within her rise. "I will not let you win," she said, her voice fierce. With all the strength she had left, Alyssa slammed the book shut. The light from the book exploded outward, a brilliant flash that shook the very foundations of the house. The mirror screamed, its image warping and twisting, the shadowy figure inside writhing as if in agony. The walls cracked, the chamber crumbling, and the ground began to split open beneath them. Alyssa's body was pulled in all directions, but she stood firm, her resolve unwavering. The mirror's power was fading, its grip loosening. The voice in the mirror howled one last time, but it was drowned out by the roar of the collapsing house. Then silence. The dust settled. Alyssa stood alone in the ruins, her heart pounding. The mirror was gone. The chamber was gone. The darkness that had consumed the house, the secrets that had haunted her family for generations, were finally broken. But at what cost? She turned to the others, their faces filled with awe and fear. "We did it," she whispered. "We're free." But even as she spoke, Alyssa knew the truth. Some shadows never truly disappear. Part 14. The Echo of the Past. The silence that followed the collapse of the manor was overwhelming. It was a strange, suffocating quiet that seemed to fill every inch of the air, as though even the earth itself was holding its breath. The dust hung heavy in the air, the remnants of the shattered mirrors scattered across the ground, reflecting the dim light of their torches in jagged fragments. The ruins of the chamber lay around Alyssa like the ruins of a dream, something that had never truly existed, yet had shaped everything in her life. She stood there for a long moment, breathing heavily, her body shaking from the intensity of the confrontation. The weight of the book still burned in her hands, but its power had faded, the glow gone, its words nothing but ashes in her memory. The darkness that had once loomed over her was gone, but the world felt hollow without it, like a scar that would never fully heal. Alyssa, Marco's voice broke through the silence. He was standing at her side, his face pale, but full of concern. Are you all right? She nodded slowly, her gaze distant. I think so, but everything feels different, like something's missing. Sophia stepped forward, her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes full of hope. The mirror is gone. The curse is broken. Alyssa turned to face her. I'm not sure. We destroyed the mirror, but there's more to it. There always has been. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. The mirror wasn't just a thing. It was a force, an ancient force. And we've only just begun to understand its true nature. Father Bodon stepped forward, his expression grim. Alyssa's right. What we've destroyed may not be the only source of its power. There are things far older, far darker, buried deep beneath the surface of this place. We need to leave, Alyssa said softly, her voice barely a whisper. We need to get out of here, before the past pulls us back in. The others nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. They had been fighting shadows for so long. The line between what was real and what was illusion had blurred. But even now, in the aftermath, the echoes of the past could still be felt. As they made their way through the wreckage of the manor, Alyssa's mind raced. The mirror had been destroyed, yes, but there were still pieces of the puzzle left. The truth about her bloodline, the knowledge her mother had hidden, the cost of their victory. They reached the front door of the manor, pushing it open into the fading light of the evening. The sky outside was gray, the air thick with the scent of rain. The storm had passed, but the land still felt heavy, as though the earth itself had been scarred by what had happened beneath it. We can't stay here, Alyssa said, her voice trembling slightly. But where do we go from here? What happens now? The world has changed, Father Bodon said softly, his eyes distant. You've broken the cycle, Alyssa. The mirror is gone, and its power has been shattered. But the truth still remains. And with it, you must choose what to do with it. Alyssa nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She had destroyed the mirror, but the battle was not over. The echoes of the past were still there, lingering in the corners of her mind, in the memories of her mother, in the blood that ran through her veins. But Alyssa knew one thing now. The truth would not be her enemy. She would face it, no matter the cost. As they walked away from the ruins of the manor, Alyssa felt the wind shift, a cold breeze brushing past them. She looked up at the darkening sky, the weight of the world pressing against her chest. It was over. The mirror was gone, but the shadow it had cast would never fully disappear. Not as long as she was still standing. Part 15, The Choice. The road ahead was uncertain, but the journey had brought Alyssa to a place where she no longer feared the unknown. The shadow of the mirror had loomed over her life for so long, twisting everything she knew, making her question her past, her family, and even her own identity. But now, with the ruins of the manor fading behind her, Alyssa was free of its grip. Or so she thought. The storm clouds that had gathered above the manor's ruins had finally parted, revealing a dull, overcast sky. The air felt heavy, thick with a quiet that was both comforting and unsettling. The wind had died down, and the land seemed to hold its breath, as if awaiting the moment when everything would be decided. As they walked away from the manor, the others kept close. The journey out had been silent, heavy with the realization of what they had all just been through. They had faced death, darkness, and their deepest fears. And yet, they were still here, still standing. Alyssa felt the weight of the book in her hand, the remnants of the ancient power it had held still lingering in her fingers. She didn't know where it would lead her next. She didn't know if she would ever truly escape the darkness that had shaped her life. Where will you go now? Marco's voice broke the silence, his eyes searching her face. What will you do? Alyssa hesitated, her gaze distant as she looked ahead. I'm not sure, but I can't go back to my old life. Not after everything I've learned. The past, it can never truly be left behind, can it? No, Father Bodon replied softly. The past always follows us, whether we choose to confront it or not. But you have a choice, Alyssa. You have the power to shape what comes next. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who is touched by the mirror's curse. Alyssa felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The weight of his words sank deep into her, and she knew they were true. She had destroyed the mirror, but there was more to be done. The truth was still out there, scattered like broken glass, waiting to be pieced together. The world would never be the same, and neither would she. I can't keep running, she whispered to herself. I have to face what's left. All of it. Marco stepped closer to her, his presence steadying. You're not alone, Alyssa. We're all here with you. Her heart swelled with gratitude. But there was still that ache, that feeling of being tethered to something dark and ancient, something beyond her control. The truth of her family's history, her mother's legacy, was a burden she couldn't escape. But Alyssa was no longer afraid of it. She had destroyed the mirror, and in doing so, she had severed the chains that bound her to the past. Now, she had to decide what to do with the power she had inherited. The knowledge, the bloodline. The choice was hers. We'll figure this out together, Alyssa said, her voice steady. We have to. As the group continued their journey, the road ahead remained uncertain. There would be more challenges, more decisions, and more truths to uncover. But for the first time, Alyssa felt a glimmer of hope. The shadow that had haunted her was gone, and in its place, there was a new beginning. She had faced the darkness. Now, she could choose the light. And with that, Alyssa stepped forward, leaving the past behind, not as a victim, but as a survivor. A woman forged in the flames of her own strength. Epilogue. Years passed. The manor, now in ruins, became a distant memory, a reminder of what had once been. Alyssa never returned. She traveled, seeking the truth about her family's legacy, and in the process, discovered a world of hidden knowledge and forgotten histories. She uncovered old artifacts, untold stories, and the shadowy remnants of her ancestors' past, but she never let it consume her. As for the others, they too found their own paths. Father Bodon returned to his monastery, where he spent his days teaching and spreading wisdom. Sophia and Marco went on to live lives far from the darkness of the manor, finding peace in the simplicity of their choices. But Alyssa never forgot. Every now and then, she would find herself standing in front of a mirror, looking into her own reflection. And in those moments, she would remember what had been lost and what she had gained. The darkness was still there, a part of her, but it no longer controlled her. It was just a shadow now, flickering on the edges of her mind. And though she knew that shadows would always remain, Alyssa had learned one important truth. She was no longer afraid of them.